Alright, welcome back. You know, when we think about crime, we often see it as black and white. Someone broke the law or they didn't. But the truth is, it's so much more complicated than that. In fact, sometimes what looks like a crime isn't a crime at all. It really all comes down to the circumstances. Put yourself in this situation for a second. You're on a dark street, someone comes at you, and you have to fight back to protect yourself. In the struggle, they get seriously hurt. So the big question is, are you now a criminal? And the law's answer is kind of the classic lawyer answer, right? It depends. The act itself, the fact that you injured someone, is just one piece of the puzzle. The law is way more interested in the why and the how, the full context of what was going on. And that's exactly what we're going to unpack today. So let's dive into the first big category, justifying circumstances. This is where the law looks at what you did and basically goes, nope, you didn't actually do anything wrong here. No crime was committed. End of story. So what does that mean, a justifying circumstance? It means your action was totally legal, completely in line with the law. You didn't break any rules. The most famous example, the one we all think of, is self-defense. But what does it actually take to legally claim it? Well, you can think of it like a checklist. The law has these 3 boxes you have to tick. First, and this is the absolute non-negotiable, there has to be unlawful aggression. Second, the force you used has to be a reasonable necessity to stop it. And third, you can't have started the whole thing by provoking the person. Now, this is super important. Not all aggression is illegal. Think about it. A police officer using force to make an arrest, that's a form of lawful aggression. For self-defense to even be on the table, you need unlawful aggression, a real sudden attack or the immediate threat of one. If that's not there, you have nothing to legally defend yourself against. And get this, the law's definition of aggression is way broader than you might think. It's not just about life or death threats. The source material actually points out that even a slap is considered unlawful aggression. Why? Because it's not just a physical act. It's seen as an attack on a person's dignity. Okay, so that's when no crime happened. But what if a crime did happen, but the person who did it wasn't really in control? Maybe they weren't in their right mind, or they weren't acting freely. This is where we get into a whole different category, exempting circumstances. And this is a really important distinction. With a justifying circumstance, we're saying no crime was committed, period. But with an exempting circumstance, the law says, okay, yeah, a crime happened, but we're going to excuse the person who did it from any punishment. The whole focus shifts from the act itself over to the actor's state of mind. So what's the logic here? It all comes down to the idea of free will. The law says that to be truly guilty, your actions have to be voluntary. If you acted without real intelligence or freedom or intent, well, were you truly responsible for what you did? And you see this pop up in a few key areas. For instance, someone who is legally declared insane or a child under the age of 15. It also covers things like a pure accident, or if someone is literally forced to do something by an irresistible physical force, or if they're acting out of this uncontrollable fear of something even worse happening to them. Now, a really powerful and frankly heartbreaking modern example of this is what's known as battered woman syndrome. This is a legal concept that acknowledges how long-term systematic abuse can completely change a person's mental state and how they perceive danger and control. It's based on this horrible, recognized cycle of violence. It starts with this tension-building phase. Then it explodes into an acute battering incident. And then, and this is the really insidious part, it's followed by this tranquil, loving phase, where the abuser is sorry and promises it'll never happen again. This cycle psychologically traps the victim, making them feel like there's no way out. Alright, so we've covered situations where someone is totally off the hook, right? No guilt. But most criminal cases aren't like that. A crime was committed, and the person is responsible. But the punishment, well, that's not set in stone. Think of it like a volume dial that can be turned up or down, and that's where mitigating and aggravating circumstances come in. It's pretty straightforward. Mitigating circumstances turn the dial down. They lessen the penalty. They're factors that suggest maybe the person's intent wasn't as bad as it seemed. On the flip side, aggravating circumstances turn the dial up. They increase the punishment because they show the offender was acting in a particularly cruel or depraved way. So what kind of things can turn that dial down? Well, things like if the victim provoked them, or if they acted in the heat of passion, completely lost their cool. Maybe they didn't intend for things to get so bad. Even things like turning yourself involuntarily or being over 70 can lower the sentence. It shows the law has a little room for human frailty. And on the other side, what cranks that dial all the way up? These are the factors that make a crime feel much worse. Things like using treachery. There's a specific legal term for it, alavesia, which basically means you made sure the victim couldn't possibly defend themselves, or using the cover of darkness, or committing the crime inside the victim's own home. These things show a level of coldness and calculation that the law takes very seriously. Okay, and here's a really interesting little side note that involves the police. The law draws a super fine line between two concepts, instigation and entrapment, and the difference is huge. If a cop induces or convinces an innocent person to commit a crime they had no intention of committing, that's instigation. And guess what? It's a get-out-of-jail-free card. But if a cop just sets up a sting for a criminal who was already planning to do the crime, that's entrapment, and sorry, that is not a valid defense. All right, let's take a step back and look at the big picture here. We've gone all the way from situations with zero crime to crimes where the person isn't held liable, and finally to crimes where the punishment itself can change. And this chart really breaks it all down perfectly. You've got justifying, no crime, no liability, nothing to punish. Then exempting. Yep, a crime happened, but still no liability. And finally, you have mitigating and aggravating, where there's definitely a crime and definitely liability, but the penalty itself gets adjusted either down or up, depending on all those details. So what's the big takeaway from all this? It's that criminal justice isn't just a rigid checklist of did you do it or not. It's a much more nuanced, much more human system. It's trying to judge not just the action, but the actor, and the entire story that wraps around what happened. So here's a little challenge for you. The next time you're watching a courtroom drama or reading about a case in the news, think about this framework. Ask yourself, was that act justified? Should the person be excused? Are there mitigating factors here that we're not hearing about? It'll give you a whole new way of looking at what justice really means. Thanks for tuning in.